we really should be spending more time thinking about the air that we breathe. And if we do so, people have miraculous transformations. I could tell you about people that were in wheelchairs with GJ feeding tubes inside, literally feeding them nutrients to keep them alive, who are walking again and no feeding tube after they've addressed problems with the air quality inside their house.
Toxins are everywhere. From the disinfectants at the gym, the cups we drink from, the air we breathe, it's just unavoidable. Studies show that over 90% of people have detectable levels of herbicides like glyphosate in their body. Chronic exposure to things like heavy metals, microplastics, pharmaceuticals, it's pushing us over the edge. Our bodies are communicating that they've had enough, be it skin issues, autoimmune diseases, hormone imbalance, constant infections. It's time to dig into the role toxins play in disease. This season's all about understanding why our toxic loads are tipping and how to take practical steps to support your body's natural detoxification pathways and learn how to reduce toxins in your everyday life.
What's up, Roots and Fruits community? As you know, this season we're diving deep into the realm of toxicity, and today we have a very special conversation about mold. I say it's special because it's near and dear to my heart right now as we're currently dealing with mold in our new home and remediating. And so the timing for this conversation with Michael Rubino could not be better. Michael is the leading expert in air quality in my world, and he's the founder of Home Cleanse, a company dedicated to transforming homes by addressing indoor air quality, which is such a huge issue when it comes to toxicity in the body and how it affects human health. Michael is an author, an advocate, and just an incredible human that I'm excited to get to know today. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Okay, when you were like a child, someone asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Did you ever think that you would be a mold expert? How did you get here?
Absolutely not. No, I mean, who does, right? It's one of those careers that, I think you have to fall into. I think that's just the best way to describe it. I mean, there's so many amazing things people can do with their lives. And I never would have thought I would be a mold expert, but here I am. And it actually started because my dad's been a restoration contractor since I'm 5 years old. So I've pretty much been around construction my entire life. I'll be honest, I hated it. I never wanted to be involved in construction, period, let alone restoration. But after Hurricane Sandy happened and decimated the Northeast, and I saw this pattern of people getting sick, I knew that I can use this skill set that I've learned over the years, just being around construction my entire life, and try to help figure out why isn't remediation working. And that journey really kind of created this fire in me, especially as I saw people getting sick and then I saw people getting better as a result. And I realized how vast this problem actually is. I said, you know what? There's nothing else I'd rather be doing with my time and with my life. And it happened completely on a freak accident.
That's so funny. It's how it goes. Like, I don't think there's some people who are like, I want to be a doctor, and there they are, but it's far and few between, I would say. So what was it that you saw in terms of when you said why remediation is not working? Like, what is it that you saw in terms of maybe some gaps in the way things were being done that people were still getting sick?
So I want to just tell the story of the first house I ever remediated. And it's obviously I'll never forget this story, but it's this older woman. She was otherwise healthy. After Hurricane Sandy, her home was impacted. She had it remediated, right? Thought nothing of it. All of a sudden developed joint pain. And so much so that she actually started to need a walker to like get around. And this woman was in her 60s, not someone that I would say like all of a sudden needs a walker. It didn't make sense. And she started dealing with brain fog, chronic fatigue, and this joint pain, this debilitating joint pain that actually impacted her ability to walk. And so I found this profoundly interesting for me because she was sure that it was her house that was, causing these ailments. She's like, before Hurricane Sandy, Michael, I've never had these issues before. You wouldn't believe it, right? So what's remarkable about this story is when you walk into her house, you didn't smell like mold. I didn't see mold. There was no visible signs of mold ever existing because they removed everything and then put all new drywall back, right? So to me, it looked like this beautifully renovated place. I sit down at her kitchen counter. I'm looking over lab results. The lab results don't match up with how the place looks, which was, again, another remarkable thing for me. I couldn't understand it because I've seen moldy homes throughout my life, right? Mm-hmm. You see mold usually, right? When you think of a moldy home. And so this didn't really match up with my expectations. And here she was, sure as heck that there was problems in her house and they were making her sick. So I did what anyone would do. I wrote up a contract to address what was in the lab results. And again, I was sort of in disbelief that I might not find anything. And I told her, I can't see anything. So the only thing we could do is cut open the walls. So she agrees to the contract, agrees we have to do this. My dad had a company that was in existence for 20 years. He had all the licensing and certifications that he needed to do the work. But this was my first project. And she knew that and she just loved the passion that I had to kind of get down to the root cause and figure this out. So we started this project. I opened up the wall, set up the containment, set up engineering controls, do everything I learned in my classes that I needed to do to remediate this property. And as I opened up the wall, I found a carpet of black mold behind the wall.
Oh my gosh.
And this was right next to her HVAC machine that undoubtedly was drawing air from this area into the rest of the equipment and then blowing it around the house. And the most remarkable thoughts started entering my mind, like, okay, how does this happen? Okay, how does an insurance company pay for some company to come in, restore the home, but obviously they didn't restore it properly because there's still mold there, right? So that's problem number one. And then problem number two is like, I'm thinking about all this, I just finished my classes, like literally just finished it. So they're fresh in my mind. And I'm like, no, they're not talking about the byproducts of mold. And they're not talking about how that mold obviously was getting into the HVAC system. No mention in the classes at this time about the HVAC system and what you need to do and how do you make sure mold's not in there and how do you clean them. None of this. It's just all the protocols were set up containment, cut out the mold, spray your biocides, and you're done. And so, I am trying to figure this whole thing out. I'm like, well, I don't see how you're going to feel better if we don't obviously address and remove the mold from this area. And there were a couple other areas too. So this was like the first area we worked on and then realized like, okay, all these other spots across the house, there were some spots in the kitchen and some spots in some of the bedrooms. We had to set up containment and open up all those areas. But again, my mind goes to, well, we have all these spores that get across the house. And even if I remove the source, you're still breathing that stuff in. So you're still going to feel that. So we have to figure out, how do we clean this house to remove that? How do we deal with the HVAC system appropriately? And then there was this fancy word that everybody was talking about called mycotoxins. Now, mycotoxins are toxins of the fungus produced by certain species of mold that are terrible for the human body. I mean, we regulate them in our food supply for a reason because they're not good for humans to consume. Right. Yet here they are in the environment and you could be breathing them in. And so I'm like, well, how do we do that? How do we look at that? And so then I had to do research on, okay, we understand mycotoxins aren't good. How do I remove them from a home, right? So I started realizing they're secondary metabolites. They're essentially, they're going to contaminate like the dust and the spores that they're surrounding as they're spewing out of the colony. And so it's going to act more like a chemical residue, which means I need something that's going to degrease and actually remove and separate this particle from the surface, right? So I had to basically kind of learn how to fly this plane and build it at the same time, all while promising this woman who reminded me of my own grandmother that like I'm going to do everything in my power to figure this out. Now, I failed a few times to be frank and blunt about it, but I was determined, and I finally figured out through this process, how do I fix this house? How do we guarantee it from a post-testing perspective? And essentially, it's what spanned my career and led to me building this company of being able to guarantee a result every time, no matter what, because we systematize the exact process. But to answer your question bluntly, it's like there were so many things that weren't taught to me, which means they weren't taught to 50,000 other companies that exist in this space. Yeah. And still to this day, people aren't remediating homes properly. I mean, we just got hit. Now I live in the Southeast, so I went from the Northeast to the Southeast. We just got hit with, Hurricane Milton and Helene, right? And so it's like the same thing is happening all over again. I'm watching these houses get just not remediated properly, and it's I know people are going to get sick as a result, and I'm going to be living this nightmare all over again. And so I'm hoping that through my research and education that people learn better, people know better, and they do better as a result.
Yeah, that is huge. It's interesting when you talked about in the food supply, it's regulated, right? No one's going to eat a moldy sandwich, but people, I find, just maybe because of a lack of education, not only for people who are working in the field, but also for homeowners. It's like, I know people who have mold in their home, and I'm like, you have mold in your home, and they're like, yeah, and it doesn't seem to, be a concern until someone's sick, and then even then there's kind of a disconnect between the fact that something that you can't see is actually making you sick. So
Mm.
I think you touched on so many things, and I'm sure there's like more misconceptions from a homeowner standpoint too. Like, let's talk about bleach. Like, I had someone, because we're just going through this right now actually, which was funny because it's new since I actually scheduled this interview, and I'm like, oh, I'm so excited, I'm going to ask you so many questions. But I was telling my one buddy, I'm like, yeah, like, shoot, we got black mold in the bathroom that we're renovating, and now we're going to test the whole house and blah, blah, blah. He's like, just throw bleach on it. I'm like, no way. And I sent him your article on it. I was like, read this, And I'm like, why don't people know the basics? It's because they're not taught it. So can you shed some light on that? What are some common myths when it comes to like just getting rid of it with bleach or other things?
So here's the problem. I feel like as a society, we really messed this whole thing up. First off, the whole bleach conversation, that's all bleach marketing. That bleach marketing has been fantastic in the 80s and 90s. Use bleach for everything, right? It's like, as a matter of fact, so many people associate the smell of bleach with the smell of thinking that that's clean. And man, that couldn't be further from the truth. That smell of clean is just the absence of smells, actually, right? And so when nothing smells, we know it's clean. When it smells, we know it's not clean, right? That's really how it should be. And so we don't need things like candles and fragrances and bleach and all these different products that can also be harmful for us to inhale, to think that things are clean. We shouldn't notice a smell at all. Air quality, I think I want to take a step back and just talk about air quality in general.
Yeah.
The human being consumes more air than anything else on the planet. And it's pretty much true for any organism here, right? Cats, dogs, they're all going to breathe more air than they are going to drink water, than they're going to eat food. So looking at air quality is the biggest bucket. What's the next biggest bucket? Probably the water, right? You can't go a few minutes without air. You can't go a few days without water. You can go longer without food, right? And so food's going to be kind of that third bucket in terms of just human consumption and external factors. Now, with that being said, you take 20,000 breaths per day, you consume enough air to fill up a normal sized swimming pool every single day. Put that into perspective. You're not drinking a swimming pool full of water. You're not eating a swimming pool full of Fruit Loops, whatever else else out there that you're eating, right? Yeah. But the reality of the situation is air quality is greatly important. Now, when do you ever hear about air quality for health? Unless it's you're listening to me or somebody like me telling you this. You just don't hear it. You're not taught it in schools. Your doctor's not asking about air quality when you go to the doctor and you say you're not feeling well, you have allergies, you have sinus issues, right? What are they telling you? Oh, let's do an allergy panel. Oh, here, take some Sudafed, take this, take that. Nothing about let's see how the air you're breathing is, right? Which would be a root cause factor. And so we've really missed the mark. And now that I've just mentioned that to you, hopefully you feel as stupid as I did when I first came to this conclusion that like, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer. The average person is breathing in like 100 million particles a day, right? I mean, it's absurd. And what those particles represent and how they impact the human body should be of vital interest to everybody, right? And so think about all of the things you've ever heard of, asbestos or lead, bacteria, mold. The number one pathway that it's impacting you is going to be through inhalation, right? Now, so I think we really want to take a look at that. Look at COVID pandemic, right? We realize, inhalation, greatest route of exposure, right? Remember at first we were nuts. We were wiping down our packages. We were wiping down our groceries, right? Like we were just unsure, but no, we realized, we don't have to worry about that. It's actually through the air, right? It's connecting with people through the air that are impacted. Well, air transmission is very important, because air quality is actually the greatest risk for human health. But yet we don't talk about that. So that's a huge problem, right? Now, because of that, what allows things to exist, allows these fallacies to exist, like something so small that I can't see can't hurt me, right? I mean, we had people divided pretty heavily on COVID, right? COVID's a hoax. It doesn't hurt me, right? Well, unfortunately, what we realize is, yes, viruses are very, very small. We can't see them, but yes, they can hurt us. Sometimes they can kill us. Look back at history. There are viruses that have wiped people out. Spanish flu, ring a bell, anybody, right? And so we have to think about all of the things that exist in our ecosystem that we can't see, that unfortunately we breathe in, that unfortunately impact the human body negatively. Most of the time negatively, unless it's oxygen, then it's very positively, right? But I think that's something that we really need to hang our hats on, because it's a really easy thing to miss. As you can see, we've been missing it all this time. And it allows all these other misconceptions to kind of enter in. And so then we start to hear things like, well, mold is no big deal. Well, I don't agree with that statement, because the organism mold constantly producing spores, which themselves can cause issues, right? It can allow mold to start colonizing in your mucous membranes. If you've never gone to an ENT and asked about mold, you really should, because they're surgically removing mold from people's mucous membranes when people have mold issues, right? And so that's really interesting, is it not? As we start to think about, okay, so now mold can colonize in the body. That's not something that you probably want. We know that's not going to be good for our health. But then we have all the other issues that come with it, like the skin issues that can result from mold entering through the skin, the largest organ. We can have respiratory problems. And then anything you inhale that's too small, if you look at the American Lung Association's website, anything smaller than 10 microns poses the greatest human health risk. Well, mold is smaller than 10 microns. Bacteria is smaller than 10 microns. Viruses, just to name a few things. Toxins, of course, right? And so these things, they bypass our self-defense mechanisms. And then what happens? Then they enter our bloodstream. So what does that mean? That means we've went from inhalation and the effects that it can cause through inhalation, but then ingestion and the effects it can cause through ingestion. Now we're dealing with chronic inflammation. Now we're dealing with gut issues. Now we're dealing with brain issues. These are not things that we should be taking lightly, but yet mold's no big deal, right? This is what I've heard growing up. And so then we have this other aspect that people don't realize is, I'm not just concerned about mold in your house. If you have mold in your house, guess what? You have bacteria in your house. So now you're dealing with mold and you're dealing with bacteria. You have these organisms that are constantly bombarding your immune system every time you take a breath of air. How good could that be for you? Not very good.
It's terrible.
Then mold and bacteria also can produce toxins, right? Bacteria can produce endotoxins and it can produce exotoxins, right? And then we have the fungal toxins produced by certain species of mold. So now we've just got a smorgasbord full of stuff that's happening inside our walls. Sometimes we don't even know or see it, that's impacting the human body. And I thought mold couldn't hurt us. And the other argument people say is, well, mold's been around forever, so why now? Well, you're right. Mold has been around forever. Actually, there's a mold remediation protocol written in the Bible, in the Old Testament, under Leviticus, where they literally, if they had fungus issues growing inside the house, which obviously is mold, they would come in, they would clean it, and they would bless the house. If it came back, you know what they would do? They'd tear the house down, carry the stones a mile outside the village so it didn't taint the rest of the houses. So thousands of years ago, mold was a problem. We just, history tends to repeat itself because we forget these things, right? And then after that aspect, you want to say, well, why else is mold such a big problem? Well, it's a bigger problem today than it was 50 years ago because our houses are tighter, right? So if I have water damage under my house and I have mold growth, maybe it's a little bit of mold, but I'm breathing in more mold per breath. The reason being is because I don't have a lot of air exchange. So I have a limited volume of air inside my house because my house is tighter today than it was 50 years ago. So of course, we're going to be dealing and seeing a heightened effect from these issues inside of our homes because of that one aspect. The other issue is we build houses a little bit crappier today than we did 50 years ago. Gosh.
Yeah.
Look at a 2x4 from 1950 and a 2x4 today. It doesn't even look like wood. Okay. Look at that aspect. Then think of a plaster home that had ventilated walls. So there was an air gap between these walls with plaster, which is a cementitious product, versus drywall, which is essentially a paper product that we use today. So of course we didn't insulate walls that back then because they were all ventilated properly. Of course, our energy bills were through the roof, but hey, there's trade-offs to everything. Yeah. Now today we build tight, we save a lot more energy, but we have a lot more health issues as a result. And it's no secret that if you trace this from our buildings changing and our buildings getting moldier and moldier, and probably riddled with bacteria. You trace this back to when the HVAC system was invented, which obviously helps circulate all this crap around our house. And you trace that side by side with the growing epidemic of our health crisis here, it matches up, meaning that the indoor environment where we spend 90% of our time, which could be 5 times or more worse than the outside air that we breathe, which seems to be making us sicker. It's no wonder. We really should be spending more time thinking about the air that we breathe. And if we do so, people have miraculous transformations. I could tell you about people that were in wheelchairs with GJ feeding tubes inside, literally feeding them nutrients to keep them alive, who are walking again and no feeding tube after they've addressed problems with the air quality inside their house. I mean, I can tell you endless amounts of stories of miraculous transformations by people looking at the quality of air they're breathing and getting themselves out of these bad situations. And unfortunately, it's the word does, good news never travels fast. Bad news travels fast, right? And so I'm shouting it from the rooftops. I'm hoping people are listening because it's impacting our health. It's affecting our longevity. And it's obviously it's a big problem that's certainly contributing. I'm not going to say it's the end all cause, but going back to how great route of exposure is, how important air quality is, and watching that decline side by side, I'm telling you, it's contributing, and we need to pay attention to that.
Yeah. We just purchased a new home, and I've listened to some other podcasts you've been interviewed on, people like Dr. Jill Krista, right? I worked at a health food store. We sold EC3. You see people coming in with mold issues. And I think it's kind of a big anxiety for me where I'm like, I'm scared to buy a home because you can't always see it, right? But there were a few homes that we walked into, and I'm not trying to sound judgmental, but I do have to say it. It's like both of them were estate sales, and both of them just reeked of mold. And you wonder why they died. Like, it's not my business. I don't know, but you're like, people are sick and dying. And they're like, these 2 homes in particular were just, you walk in and I'm like, I don't even want to be in here for a showing. Like, I'm going to stay in the yard because it's so bad and I would never live here. So those are the obvious homes, but as you're saying, like, it's in your case with the first home you did, behind the walls, didn't smell of it, looked pretty. So what do you suggest for people if they maybe want to pursue exploring this? Like, can you trust like traditional methods of even testing air quality? We're in Canada, so we don't, a lot of people listening to this won't have access to your stuff, but like home cleanse wise, but what do you suggest for people in terms of even just advocating for like testing their air quality? How do you do that well?
All right. So I want to give people a free hack first.
Yeah.
It's not scientific, but it's pretty remarkable. After a while, I started noticing this pattern. Every time I was in a moldy environment, typically an environment that was making people sick, I noticed that their toilet tanks were full of mold. Now, obviously the toilet tank isn't the problem. It's a byproduct of the problem. It's a symptom of the problem. So essentially there's so much mold circulating in the air opportunistically that it's getting into the toilet tank. And the toilet tanks, they got the lids on them, right? Like they're not airtight, but it's not like it's just open to the elements and there's so much opportunity, right? Yeah. There's a lid on it. So there's some stopgap for mold to get in there. So if you start to see like mold growing in toilet tanks, that there's a lot of mold already in the air, opportunistically getting inside the toilet tank, right? And so I would say that's an easy thing to do is just pop the lid off, look at the underside of the lid, look inside the toilet tank. If you see mold growth in there, you can't miss it. It's going to be like black in color. It's going to look, like it shouldn't be there, right? It should be clean. It shouldn't be a bunch of mold in there. If you see a bunch of mold in there, it's a pretty telltale sign. You don't even need to test the house. You know that there's mold in that house somewhere, and just figuring out where it is going to be your next action item, right?
So how do you do that when you don't have people who are trained in the ways of Michael Rubino?
I mean, you literally pull the cover off and you look on the underside of it and look inside of it. If you see black stuff growing, it's most certainly mold, and that there's somewhere nearby. How do you check the surrounding area? That's where it's going to be a little trickier. So the more scientific screening tool that I like to use, it's called the dust test. The dust test isn't available in Canada right now. Probably will be very soon, but I can't tell you a definitive timeline. It's really
Okay.
going through the customs process. The dust test is basically, if you ever heard of ERMI,
No.
the dust test uses PCR technology.
Mm.
ERMI is this relative moldiness index that the EPA developed. The index is not very good. It's just basically a sum of log of group 1 subtracted from a sum of log of group 2. I hate the score, but the technology it's built upon, MSQ PCR, is fantastic. We all might remember PCR technology from COVID. So it's a DNA-specific analysis, polymer chain reaction process that is essentially you're putting primers into this machine and you're checking for the DNA of what's there. And so from this perspective, you could tell how many different species of mold there are in your house and how many particles there are per milligram of dust, which is really helpful because if you see an abnormality or an overgrowth of different species of mold, it can give you a pretty good clue as to what's going on. For example, if I see high levels of Aspergillus penicillium, good. Well, that could be in a basement, that could be in a crawl space, could be an attic, or could be an HVAC. Right? Because that mold only requires a little bit of moisture or humidity. It grows pretty quickly, 24 to 48 hours. So there's a bunch of different places it can be growing in, but at least it gives you some areas to narrow down. If I see something like Stachybotrys or Cotomium or Fusarium, now I know there had to have been a water damage event because those molds require more moisture. So there has to be some sort of standing leak that's occurring. And that area has to be wet for at least 3 to 5 days, sometimes even longer, for those molds to even begin to grow, right? So a little bit of a different approach to that. And so, I mean, if you're in Canada and you can't get the dust test, Google, MSQ PCR technology or PCR testing. There are labs that I know of or that people have access to in Canada because I've definitely have consulted with people in Canada and they've been able to get it. I just don't know the lab off the top of my head. But just Google that and get that test because that test is really valuable and it's super simple. You just go around your house, you collect dust. It's a screening tool. It's not going to tell you where it is. You can infer where it is from the test, but it's certainly going to answer this problem. Do I have mold? What kinds of mold do I have? And if you're seeing a doctor, and let's say you're doing some mycotoxin testing of the body to see if you're having an issue detoxing certain mycotoxins from the body, you can correlate those mycotoxins with the exact molds in your home to see if you're getting exposed at home or not. And I think that's really helpful because sometimes people move and they're like, well, is it my new house, my old house? What's going on? And so that tool could be very vital. But now we have to get to this other conversation. All right, I screened my house. I know I have mold. Now I got to figure out how to test it. This is the question that is the bane of my existence here because inspections are like if we thought remediation was the Wild West, I'll tell you, it starts with the Wild West starting with inspections because I could be the best remediator in the world. But if I have a bad inspection report, there's not much I can do to help you. I could be just to play devil's advocate here. I could be the best doctor in the world, right? But if I send you to a lab and they just test for like your vitamin K levels, right? Instead of like all the different things that can be wrong with you, how am I supposed to infer what you need to do next to heal the human body? I can't. And so many mold inspectors go into a facility or a home and they're not using all the tools and techniques that they should be. They're not giving me a complete picture as to really what's going on with this home or building. And I want to, there are some fundamental schools of thought where people challenge my ideology. And some of these schools of thought say, well, Michael, it costs a lot of money to do a lot of testing. I hear you. I understand. Just like it costs a lot of money to go to a doctor and do a bunch of lab tests. I do understand that. But you know what else costs a lot of money and time and resources? Not having the right information. Because if I don't have the right information, I'm probably going to remediate this house improperly. I might start opening up this wall to my right, and maybe there's a little bit of mold there, but actually maybe it was the wall to the left that was the bigger problem. Actually, maybe the wall to the left is so bad that it's making the wall to the right look like there's a problem when it's actually the wall to the left. I mean, I've seen these things happen hundreds of thousands of times. And the problem is that, a lot of these inspectors, there's this air test, right? They just want to come in. They want to take an air sample from the center of the room because it's easy. They set up a pump. They set up this machine. They collect, 75 liters of air. And through that, they're able to look and see, okay, what spores did I capture in that 5 minutes of time? And is it high enough compared to outside that there's a problem or someone should be worried about?
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you the problem with this whole fundamental. First off, we learned from COVID, there was this magic number, right? 6 feet. You had to stay at least 6 feet away. Well, that's because small particles like viruses, like mold, like bacteria, they're very light. They don't travel very far through the air. And so you have to kind of cough, right? And when you cough, you're going to push that particle a lot further, probably to that 6 foot mark. But think about mold growing in your wall. I mean, there's really not a lot of air movement that would make that particle travel very far. And so if I did an air sample in the center of the room, I am more likely than not the furthest possible point away from the problem, which means that I'm not going to capture enough spores to make it look like there's an issue. I want to say this very bluntly. If the air sample in the center of the room is bad, that means that there is so much freaking mold in that room that it's literally filling up the space and traveling to the center of the room.
Oh my gosh.
I want to give another point to this too, is that you have to think about all the stuff that's already in your air. Like if you ever sat near a window on a sunny day and you saw how much dust there is because the light refracted off the dust and you're like, whoa, right? There is so much likeliness for the mold that's growing in the corner of your room to attach to particles of dust that are already in the air by the time it gets to the center of the room. You know what that means? Well, the dust is too big to fit inside this cassette. So it's going to miss all of that. It's going to bounce right off the equipment. It's not going to draw into the equipment. Only the single isolated spores that made it through the jungle of dust to get to the center of the room, opportunistically, like this is like we're talking a game of chance here.
Yeah.
Only those spores are going to get picked up and analyzed by that lab technician. And so, again, there has to be such a large volume of issue inside that room for the center of the room to be picked up. And I can't tell you how many people argue with this all the time. And they say, well, but Michael, if there's not a problem in the center of the room, then anybody who's breathing in that room will be fine. Well, what if my bed is right next to that problem? Now, I'm not breathing the air in the center. How often do you sit in the center of any room and breathe the air right there? You never do. I'm sitting, look at me. I'm sitting near a wall where there could be an issue right now. I'm near a corner. There's another wall right here, just a couple feet away. And so I'm never in the center of my room. Right. And so, when you think about all of these things, you realize, okay, it's the ideologies that people come into this, into this situation with the different technologies that they have. And they're just relying too much on this air sample in the center of the room. They're not using things like thermal imaging cameras. They're not using they're not using moisture meters. You know how many times I've asked an inspector, okay, when you come to this house, are you going to use through thermal imaging? Are you going to do moisture mapping? Are you going to, what are you going to do? The response is, well, we could. We don't normally, but we could. What do you mean you could?
Yeah.
If you aren't going to inspect this home properly and you're just going to take a couple air samples, that data is not going to be useful for me. I'm not going to be able to tell these people how they can improve their environment. And if I can't, then the $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever you're going to charge them, it's worthless. We might as well take that money and light it on fire before you even get there, because it's not going to give me the information that I need to advise them appropriately. How do we fix this house once and for all so you could breathe better, live healthier, and be happier, which is the whole goal, right? And so I know I didn't really answer your question, but I figured I'd tell you all the problems, and some of the issues we experience in this industry. And then, to back into it, to answer that question, you essentially got to vet every single person you want to hire. How are you going to inspect this house? And if they tell you that they're going to take some air samples, I'd push back and say, okay, well, where are you going to take those air samples? Yeah. Are you going to look for they should be using other tools and technologies like thermal imaging, like moisture meters, et cetera, like even your eyes, and looking for issues where you think water might be coming in, and then testing as close to the issue as possible. How close? Right. You could, in theory, people do this all the time, and actually I love when they do this. You could drill a hole in the wall, like this, the diameter of a pen, You could stick a tube from behind the wall and pull an air sample from behind the wall where the
Yeah.
problem more likely is. And then you'd get an accurate reading of like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of aspergillus or penicillium or Stachybotrys there,
Right.
which again, you test in the center of the room, it's going to make it look like there is no issue, right? And so you have to really vet people, especially, we deal with this issue city to city, state to state in the US. I mean, it's crazy. I can only imagine dealing with it, in other parts of the world like Canada, UK is another spot that we get people desperate, trying to get answers. You just have to vet people. And when it sounds too good to be true, or when it sounds like it's not going to be thorough, listen to your gut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what I'm doing with our house. I'm like, I don't trust anyone, which isn't good. I hate that that's the reality, but trying to learn, and like what you're saying is vetting people, asking what they're going to do. Are you saying that like some, let's say inspectors like actually have access to these tools, but just don't use them? Or do some of them not even, know how to do thermal imaging? Like what's the gap there?
I mean, thermal imaging is probably the easiest thing in the world. You turn it on and you point it at stuff and it tells you the temperature as you point it at things. And it literally shows you a picture. It's like the best way to look at it is like, it's almost like an X-ray for your walls, right?
Mm.
You're looking for temperature differentials. So if I look at a wall, an exterior wall, and I see that, let's just say it's summertime. So I would expect the wall to be hotter, right? Because obviously you have that heat from outside transferring inside. And I start to see like cold spots in certain locations. I might see like a cold spot around a window. I might see a cold spot where maybe there's some insulation missing. When I start seeing hot spots and cold spots close together, it's like third grade science class all over again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be dealing with condensation because the hot air mixing with the cold air is going to create moisture. And when I see stuff like that, I almost always know you got to test that wall. Let's see what's going on, because I bet you that we're going to find mold there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm never in the business of opening up things that don't need to be opened up. Like I want you to prove to me without a shadow of a doubt I need to open up that wall.
Mm-hmm.
But the way to do that is to look for reasons why you need to test that area, and then using testing to validate. Of course, the other argument people make is like, well, if you see a temperature differential, can you just open up the wall and check? You could open up the wall and check. But every time you open up a wall and check something, it costs money. Costs money to set up containment and engineering controls to do it properly. Costs money to open up that wall. Costs money to put back that wall. Guess what? You just open up a wall. You got to paint the whole wall now. Costs money to paint the whole wall. So, when I'm spending your money, because that's when you hire me, I'm literally spending your money and advising you how to spend your money to fix certain things in the house. I want to be sure that the recommendations I'm making are of scientific measures and makes sense. Like we have to all agree, yeah, that makes sense. Now, if you're a client, you're saying, look, the testing's going to take too long. It's going to be too costly. I'd rather you just open it up and check. Good. I'm happy to do that. However, I want you to know there's a potential that we open this up and don't find anything visually remarkable, because a lot of people, when you open up a wall, you like want to see like black everywhere. Like you want to see like this visual, like disgustingness. So you could be like, yes, I'm getting my money's worth. Yeah. Sometimes that doesn't happen, especially when you're dealing with like aspergillus or penicillium. It's going to be white in color. It's hard to notice it on the back of the drywall because the back of the drywall is white in color, right? And so you might just see some spots and it's not that exciting, but it might have been a million spores colonized together that you just removed, right? And so I always preface this like, look, I want to find problems. I want to prove that they're problems, and then I want to remove those problems. And we can do that doing proper inspections, validating that there is mold there. Again, going back to, if I have mold there, I know there's bacteria there. They grow in the same locations. They both require enough the same amount of water and moisture. So we're killing two birds with one stone with that. Not to mention, when you have water damage, you're going to be off-gassing building materials. You're going to have paint on the wall that now gets wet and starts off-gassing chemicals that you don't want to be breathing in, right? So it's like it creates this whole smorgasbord of stuff you don't want to be breathing in when water starts to come into the property. And so, it's finding it, proving that their problems, removing it, and making sure. The other thing is nobody has unlimited money. It just like nobody, I
That'd
don't
be
care who
nice,
you
yeah.
are, what you do, but you don't have unlimited money.
Yeah.
So if we're trying to figure out what's the best bang for the buck, I need data to do that. Right. And so if I've got, let's say 20 different problems, not all problems are created equal, right? We might have 10 of those that are really minor that it's like, hey, that's not making a big impact on your air quality. I'd rather not focus on those 10 things because these other 10 things are. Let's do that. Well, I can't do that without scientific laboratory data to actually look and compare what species is it, how much are we talking about that's actually there, and putting those pieces of the puzzle together really helps me help people build this whole game plan for their house, all through science, not just let's just open up and check things, and then we can guarantee the outcome because we have all the information. And so if you don't do a proper inspection and you don't validate all the results by actually getting the data, then you're playing whack-a-mole. You are literally just like, oh, I think this is an issue. Let's open that one up. Okay, what about over here? Let's open that up. And you have no real plan. And I like to. I have to have plans. If we don't have a real plan, I can't work with you. So we need to have. Everybody should want to have a real plan with a real measurable outcome. And then at the end of the day, when you follow those steps appropriately, and like hopefully everything I'm saying makes sense to you, you'll have the outcome you want. You will notice some health benefits because your air quality will be usually 10 times, if not 100 times better at a minimum than what it once was.
That's wild. My goodness, you said so many good things and I have so many questions, but I want to respect your time. And I was thinking maybe we can do like a little bit of rapid fire questions because I have some Q&As from followers on Instagram. I have a couple to throw in there. So we won't do all of them, but I'll just go for it. So, okay, someone's asking about washing machines. So they had a moldy washing machine. They got rid of it. It's only a few months old. How do we clean it to make sure there's no mold? It already smells like mold.
So I'm imagining you have a front load washing machine. It's hard. I know we probably don't have that information.
Specify, but yeah.
I'm imagining you have a front load washing machine, and I'm here to be the really bad news bearer here. As long as you have a front loading washing machine, you have a rubber gasket in the front. So, you open the door in the front, you have that like usually gray or black rubber gasket. Well, all of them are designed, the way in which they're designed, they're terrible. They all trap moisture in and around that gasket. And so, look, you're going to live a normal life. You're going to go out. You're going to do things. You're going to probably get some mold on your clothes. It's going to happen. You're going to go to the grocery store. Who knows if that's moldy, right? All these things. Yeah. You're going to travel with mold in and around your clothes. You're going to throw them in your washing machine. They're going to wash them. You're going to trap moisture and mold along with it inside this rubber gasket, and you're going to have mold growth in the rubber gasket, right? Now, unavoidable if you have a front-loading washing machine. Yeah. The only thing that you can do to like buy yourself some time is when you are done washing your clothes, keep the door open. And then, those like creases in the gasket, you actually have to like pull the gasket back and dry it fully every time you wash your clothes. Wow. Now, if that sounds insane to you, I agree it is. Yeah. So I have a top loading washing machine for that very, very specific reason. Now, top loading washing machines, if the older ones, they never really had problems. The newer ones, they all have these trays now for all your detergents and all that fun stuff. Well, the water passes through the tray, right, into the detergent, bleach, whatever, all the things that you have in your washing machine, your softeners, everything. But again, it never fully dries. And then it just kind of sits there in this tray and just kind of percolates. Well, you're probably going to get mold growth in there. So you got to pull that out every once in a while. Probably, I'd say we probably do it in our household maybe like every 2 weeks, right? Not every day. We're not crazy, but every 2 weeks you really need to pull it apart, wipe it down, clean it thoroughly, put it back together. The drums usually are fine. You usually don't have an issue with the drums. And the other part where you would have a problem with the washing machine is like the drain system. And so they no matter where you live in the world, they usually make these cleaning tablets for your appliances, like your dishwasher, your washing machine. Use those. Every month, you're supposed to actually do like a deep cleaning agent to these appliances, and they help clean out all the drains and all the mold and bacteria that builds up in those. So yeah, I mean, do deep cleanings. You can wipe down the drum with like a disinfectant, easy stuff, but you want to clean the inner workings of this with those tablets and things, doing that deep cleaning session. So hopefully that gives covered, front and top as well.
Okay. Yeah, we got rid of a washer that had mold. It was a front loader as well. We just top loader, never going back. And that is my one thing. It doesn't look as nice. That's my one thing in terms of cleaning chemicals. Like we try to use natural ingredients, low toxin things, and that's the one thing I'm like, I do it every month. I'm like, it's just not worth risking that. Okay, someone asked. And they didn't specify. I'm guessing if they're talking about, a smaller localized mold issue where they don't need remediation or like restoration of a home, but they're asking what would be the safest way to remove something small. So PPE needed, etc.
Yeah, I mean, let's just say you've got like mold in your vanity and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to hire this remediation company. I'm just going to, maybe I'm handy. I'm going to remove and replace the vanity. That's fine. Yeah. I would recommend wrapping the vanity in plastic so you don't kind of carry and disturb that stuff around. Mm-hmm. I would recommend wearing PPE while you're kind of disturbing it and taking it apart and moving it off the wall. I would still probably like seal the bathroom door off because you're going to create some dust. In that dust is going to be some mold. So the more you can contain it in an area, the easier it is to clean it up and not spread this stuff across the house. So seal off the door, get the vanity off the wall, wrap it in plastic, carry it outside, dispose of it, wipe down the entire area, get a new vanity, put the new vanity in, right? So that's a very simple example. If it's in your shower grout, again, I'd probably close the bathroom door. Maybe I'd put the exhaust fan on so we could just kind of get exhausted stuff out, or I'd open a window and put like a box fan to blow out the window, or if you have an air scrubber and, great, but you use the same ideologies without kind of having to go have your own air scrubber, right? Yeah. But you essentially want to create some negative pressure, and you're going to use a scrub brush, hydrogen peroxide, clean the mold off the grout, right? The only caveat is like sometimes what you see is the tip of the iceberg, right? And you need to be prepared for that. Like sometimes people think they've got a small little issue, and then they open up the wall themselves, and then it's like, oh wow. Now there's a whole freaking iceberg underneath this thing. Yeah. And it's going 4 feet to the left, 4 feet to the right. It's going floor to like, you don't know what you're going to find until you open it up. Sometimes you just see a little spot, but it's like a whole network behind that. And so be prepared for that. Have a backup plan. If it now becomes a big issue that you are not skilled with doing properly, you may want to, have a plan to be able to stop, not use that area, and call in somebody as a professional. And so hopefully that provides people some guidance there.
Yeah, thank you. Someone whose Instagram handle includes the word homestead. So I'm picturing her living in a cabin because her question is, if you live in predominantly cedar, knotty pine house, does that make it more prone to mold?
Not necessarily. Wood is semi-porous, so it's similar to living. I mean, most houses in the U.S. are built with wood. Cement would be another semi-porous surface. A lot of houses get built with cement. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be more problematic. What you have to do is make sure that there's not water intruding into the facility, because if you have water coming in, it doesn't really matter what the house is made of. You are going to have a potential to trap moisture. Let's just say like your entire house is built of glass. Okay. If water is coming in and intruding into that glass structure, mold will grow on the glass. Obviously it's a lot easier to remediate. You just wipe it off, but mold will grow wherever there's trapped moisture, especially if you have, something touching the glass where, moisture can get trapped between those two surfaces. So if your house is cedar, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a potential mold issue, but if you're not controlling humidity inside that house, if you're not controlling water from coming into that house, you're just as prone to having mold as anybody else, even though you don't have like all that paper porous material. I mean, I would prefer having a cedar built house than a paper built house. I'll tell you that. So you're in a good spot. Yeah. But it's controlling moisture is key because wood is semi-porous, and you're probably going to have cabinets and things of that nature affixed to the cedar, right? And so anything touching another surface always provides a potential where moisture can get trapped. So
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, not out of the woods, and you still have some potential for mold to grow. And so you want to be mindful of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, this is one of my questions I'm going to insert in here. Like, did you guys build a home, and like, did you do it the old school way? Like, how did you shop for a home, build a home? Like, what would you recommend there? Because I'm like, oh my gosh, I regret buying this house.
Yeah, really funny story. I was building a home, and
Yeah.
it had a ton of mold in it, and I wasn't personally building it. I hired a builder,
Yeah.
and we ended up getting in a whole lawsuit and everything. And so it was
Wow.
like this crazy thing. Hope no one else ever has to go through that. But it answers that question, like, can a new house have mold? Brand new house could have mold. I could attest to that personally. I have the
Wow.
results to prove it. With that being said, I'm in my third house now. Third house I've ever lived in that I owned as an adult, not as as a kid with my parents.
Yeah.
So, the first house that I bought was actually the first two houses I bought were foreclosures. So essentially, the bank took it over. People stopped paying the mortgage. Bank took it over. Found tons of problems in both houses. What did I do? I got such a good deal on the house that I had enough equity to gut the entire house, remediate it the way I would remediate anyone's house,
Mm-hmm.
and then start over and rebuild it. And I was able to see all the problems. So first house, I had to replace the roof. Roof was leaking. There was a crawl space that needed to be remediated. It needed a dehumidifier. It needed waterproofing. I was able to do all that.
Mm-hmm.
I gutted, literally, I had to replace, the first floor was on top of the crawl space because the crawl space was kind of not great and was full of mold. I actually had to replace not only the flooring on the first floor, but the subfloor as well.
Wow.
Because it was just full of mold.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to fix all the, I was able to see all the problems, fix all the problems. So it was kind of awesome.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
I got such a good deal on the house. I was able to do that financially where it still made sense. I wasn't like underwater.
Yeah.
I had to replace all the windows. I replaced all the drywall. I renovated the kitchen. I renovated all the bathrooms. All the bathrooms had mold. The kitchen, everything had mold. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, had this beautiful house. I did really well on this house because the value of the house went up pretty significantly when I fixed all these things. And I was able to basically borrow the money from the bank that was my mortgage company to fix the house as well. And so it was a really savvy move for me and my family at the time. It was our first house. We ended up like almost doubling our money. Like the house, what we put into the house almost doubled the value of the house. And when we sold that house, because we were pregnant, we were getting pregnant again and we needed some more space.
Yeah.
It was great because we actually put that equity from that house and we're able to upsize and buy another house and really like have the same mortgage payment and everything.
Yeah.
So the second house we did, foreclosure again. This one was a little bit bigger of a project. We had to gut the house again, unfortunately. And I was not gonna not gut it anyway, just because I knew like what we had to do. The third house that I'm in, I did the same thing. Second house was an interesting house because one of the things we didn't know about was there was this back wall, and the back wall was kind of shifting. And the home inspector thought, probably just need some like structural plates to shore up the wall. It'll be fine. Actually, engineer came in after I bought the house and was like, no, we need to rebuild this whole wall. So I had to like jack the house up, rebuild the wall. That was probably like another 10 to 20,000. I don't remember the exact, somewhere 10, 20 grand. Wasn't expecting, right?
Yeah.
But all I can say is it was always worth it. The third house I'm in now did the same thing. We decided to move from New Jersey, where we lived, to Florida back in 2020. COVID happened. I was like, look, if we're going to quarantine, let's quarantine outside in a nice, beautiful place where we can be outside all the time, because winter was approaching and gloomy winters, not being able to go anywhere. That didn't sound like my cup of tea. Yeah. So we moved to Florida. This is our third house, gutted this house, new roof, new doors and windows. Here was something interesting. I had to put like impact doors and windows in because of the hurricane. So you had like special hurricane windows and doors.
Wow.
And do all these different code upgrades that I was not used to being here because of the hurricanes, but handled all those things. Found mold in every bathroom, mold in the kitchen, mold. We found mold in the attic because the roof was leaking. Mold around every freaking door and window because
Oh
all
my
of those
gosh.
were leaking. Like basically, this house, I got a good deal on this house because basically the original owner, and he did nothing to like maintain this house.
Oh
They
wow.
put in a brand new kitchen, of which I ripped out. They thought it was brand new anyways. Like they just kind of they didn't make great decisions when maintaining the house or renovating the house in any manner. It was just more
Mhm.
of like, let's just make it look the way we want it to look, but
Yeah.
not functional. And so
Yeah.
I ended up having to redo a bunch of stuff they did.
Oh man.
But I've been in this house now since about a little over a year. I've owned the house for about 2 years. It took me about 4 months to renovate and remediate and fix it properly.
Mhm.
Um, my family and I are very happy here. It's a
Mhm.
never ending project. The
Mhm.
hurricane knocked down my fence, so now I'm like having to rebuild a fence.
Oh man.
And there's nobody that is building fences right now because they're so slammed with all the
Mhm.
fencing.
Mhm.
So it's like it's a never ending thing. We're always like having to do certain projects here
Yeah.
or there. It's part of being a homeowner and
Yeah.
maintaining a home. There's functional stuff inside the house, like closet organizers that I'd love to have and love to do that were on the back burner because having good air quality was obviously a lot more
Yeah.
important. So it's like just like anybody else who owns a home, I'll always be working and putzing along and
Mhm.
keeping the house fresh and clean and maintained well. But it's really great for me to have myself, my wife, my two kids live in a place that is safe. And
Yeah.
it's I know enough, especially in the US here, like it's just bad. No houses are really perfect. It's really hard to find a perfect house. So I actually go the opposite end of the spectrum. Give me the ugly house that's falling
Yeah.
apart. I know how to fix it. I'll fix it. Make sure it's safe for my family and I. I'll move in. Just give me a good deal on the house where I can actually afford to do so, and I go that route. And
That's
it's
brilliant.
worked really well for me. And the house is always worth more than the money I put into it because
Mhm.
not a lot of people have the knowledge or the patience to deal with this.
Yeah, totally. I love that idea. Okay, final question for today would be, what are your thoughts on the Air Doctor, or what other air purifiers would you recommend?
I always feel like I'm hurting someone's feelings when I answer these questions.
Uh,
Uh, I think the Air Doctor is a decent piece of equipment. They've reached out to me before to get me to look at their equipment.
yeah.
There's a company so I'm this type of guy where if something isn't broken, I don't fix it, right? And
Mhm.
so there's a company I stumbled upon called Healthway. They make the IntelliPure Super V, which is like this HVAC purification system that I love. They've got really good air purifiers called like the Ultrafine. The Ultrafine's probably their Mercedes of the air filters. It's really good.
Mhm.
And they've got
I
this
just ordered
other.
that, by the way, thanks to you.
You're welcome. And then you've
Yeah.
got you've got the compact, which is like that thing's always on sale for like $200 or less, which is good for
Yeah.
smaller spaces, great for traveling. It's a pretty compact machine, as the name suggests. So it doesn't break the bank. And honestly, air purifiers, they don't have to cost a lot of money to be good. All they are is essentially vacuums with a good filter in them. And it's
Mhm.
really the filter technology that's the most important thing. And so I love their filter technology, the DFS disinfecting system they have. It keeps the filters lasting longer. It
Mhm.
allows it allows the filter technology to pick up a smaller particle due to the electrical charge. So I kind of like it. It's like almost having an air ionizer in the filter as opposed to putting out ions that force particles to attach to the floor. You've
Mhm.
got them attaching to the filter, which is great because you want to remove this stuff,
Right.
not just put it out of sight, out of mind, right? And so,
Mhm.
but I will say, like Air Doctors, seems like a great device. The research I've done in it, there are a ton of amazing air purification companies out there. Again, I stumbled upon this one. It works really well. Their customer service is great.
Mhm.
They integrate into what we do so well that it's really hard for me to get off of that. So
Yeah.
I want to give people one advice: get
Yeah.
the best filter you possibly can that removes the smallest particle possible at
Mhm.
the highest efficiency possible. So if it removes 7 nanometers at 99% efficiency. Great. That means 99% of the time, something as small as 7 nanometers is getting trapped in that filter. That means only 1% of the time it's bypassing that. And usually it's like 99.9997, whatever it is. So, get whatever you could afford in your budget that can remove the smallest particle possible, and do that research, and you'll choose something that's functional for you.
That's great advice. Thank you. Michael, where can people follow you, talk about your book, talk about your Instagram, whatever you want? Plug yourself.
Good. Thank you so much. So if you, themichaelrubino.com, that's my website. I've got like an AI chat bot on there, which is great. It's basically like talking to me, because it pulls from all the articles I've ever written. So anytime, if you have, odds are whatever question you had, I've probably already answered in an article. And so have fun asking that some questions, and you'll probably get some really cool answers that are very helpful, that could link you to the article too, if you want even deeper dives. Through there, you could also find all my social media stuff. I have Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, you name it. I'm on all the things. YouTube's great because I do a lot of in-depth videos that are helpful if you're into that kind of stuff. And of course, Instagram's really where I have, a lot of people on there and doing a lot of sharing and stuff like that. I have a great community on there. So if you're on Instagram, definitely check it out. I also have a 501c3 nonprofit called changetheairfoundation.org. I encourage you to go on there if you care about air quality. There's an abundance of free resources. It's a nonprofit. The entire goal is to educate, perform policy reform, specifically in the U.S. right now. We did pass a bill in Illinois that better protects people from unfortunately bad practices of inspections and remediation. So we're looking to help change some laws, and hopefully we can expand across outside the U.S. as soon as possible. Got to start somewhere, right? And last but not least, we do a lot of research there too. We have some great research projects. So any support you can offer, if you've liked anything I've shared with you today, please go on there and check us out. And of course, if you live in, we will go to Canada for Home Cleanse. If you live in the US or you live in Canada, you can go to homecleanse.com. If you need help with remediation, we exist to help you. It probably will be a little more expensive if you're in Canada, just to preface and forewarn, because we have to travel from the US to Canada, and there are some costs to that. So be mindful of that. But if you really cannot find someone in your area that can help you, I'd rather you do it right, and we have that option for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time and your passion. It's so evident that you love what you do. And thanks for sharing that with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast, and I hope everyone learned a lot.